All right, here we go. There we go.
So explain how the U.S. entered the war in Europe, explain the dangers for the U.S. as we made our trek across the Atlantic Ocean. That trailer should have helped. How do we combat these dangers? Detail the strategy of the Allied powers in the West when trying to liberate Nazi-occupied Europe. All right, so whenever you hear about the Allies to the West, that means Great Britain and the United States at this point. Because we're the only two countries that are left. Let's face it, France is out, and they already got invaded. We'll mention about liberation units and a lot of revolts and rebellions by the French resistance groups against the Nazi occupation, which a lot of them were very successful, which we're going to about. But at this moment here, with the Allied powers, we got the United States as we're entering the war. Great Britain, they've been there since the beginning, and now the Soviet Union. Okay, so these are the three Allied powers that we're going to focus on mostly here, talk about mostly as we're getting here to the turning point into the end of the war. The Axis powers, we already know yet. Okay, it's Germany, Japan, and Italy. We'll mention Italy, they're going to be surrendering here soon, which actually we're going to talk a little bit about today for the class.
Trying to slip it into the end.
Who was it? Jace?
Oh, it was the student thing for.
It's okay. Okay. This has been like 4 minutes and already we got phones dinging. People checking their phones. Ariel, relax. Relax.
Check this.
You play stop kicking my chair on Jimmy.
I'll bring it, knock that off. Ariel.
You want courage.
Hey, are we emailing someone or trying to go over a bell right here? Come on now.
Provide it.
I don't care.
Oh, I'm trying to do it.
All right, here we go, here we go. Yeah, Shanique's trying to. Okay, so with the trailer, which we talked about, Greyhound, that could be a movie you guys maybe want to watch here at the end of the year. Pretty good, it's pretty good. Again, the dangers of the Atlantic obviously are horrifying because there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. If your ship is being targeted, even in a convoy system by a group of, let's say U-boats, again, there's nowhere you can really just flee to. So with that being said, it is a very dangerous part of the battlefield, right? A different battlefield, obviously, but it's pretty darn scary. All right, so with that, we talked about the convoy system. Yeah, we mentioned about sonar. I know I paused and talked about depth charges, which they're pretty darn cool too. That's a way for the Allied powers to combat against these U-boats that are deep under the water. They will launch off the deck of the ship, and as they hit the surface, they sink down, sink down, sink down, and once it comes close to a U-boat, right, a lot of it has detection on it. And as it gets close to a larger object like this, it'll explode. And then they talked about it, which you saw in the video, as the oil would come up to the surface, right? Then they would know that they got U-boat. So that's pretty cool. Pretty interesting. All right, so with the convoy system, again, this was a way to try to protect ourselves across the Atlantic, right? What did I say yesterday about the Battle of the Atlantic? I said, hey, write this down, because this is important about the battle itself. Austin.
Isn't that the longest battle?
Yeah, good job, right? So whenever you think about battles during the conflicts in World War One and World War Two, right? Whenever you're trying to make your way across the Atlantic Ocean, in this case here for the United States, to help support Great Britain and Soviet Union at this time, and get our troops over, right? This is the longest running battle. It never ends, right? The whole time, you gotta imagine these forces are trying to blockade one another, take out supply ships, right? Take out resources, materials coming in and out. Right? Let's face it, Great Britain, they're an island. They're dependent on the resources coming in. They don't get it, they're not going to survive. And this whole time, you got to imagine the Germans, with their U-boats, are trying to surround Great Britain. On the surface, though, we all know the Royal Navy is pretty darn tough. So they're blockading Germany. So this is never ending. It's from the start to the very end. All right, real quick. So the United States, Great Britain, as they're entering a war, where are they entering a war here in Europe? Great Britain's already been fighting, right? We already know this, but as the United States enters, right, they don't enter in Europe, they enter in somewhere else. Brody, yes, good job, North Africa. Why? Why did they want to enter into North Africa? What was the reason for this? Elena? Yeah, okay, good job, right? So this whole time, the Axis powers, ever since the late 1930s, even mid 1930s, they're accessing a lot of land and territory, imperializing it in North Africa, the resources, especially oil, right? They got to fuel their military machines. Let's face it, the Axis powers had pretty darn good weaponry. Okay. And for the Allies, they say, hey, if we cut them out of North Africa, there goes the resources, right? If you don't have any fuel, if you don't have any oil here, well, you're not going to be able to utilize these new mechanisms on the battlefield, these new tanks and airplanes. Okay. It just won't operate. If you cut that off sooner or later, well, you're not gonna be able to fight any longer. So that's one reason. Good. What's another reason? Why is the United States, why do they want to go into North Africa first? Right? Why don't they just go in guns a-blazing into Europe? Elon? Oh, okay, they're not prepared, right? Yes, they want to try to take baby steps in a way. Okay, they know that the weakest link, well, who's the weakest link of the Axis power? Audrina? Italy, yeah, good job. So they know that a lot of the occupation in North Africa, and obviously where Italy is Italian forces. Right, and this is the weakest link. Okay, what did I say yesterday? This is the what of Europe. Entering in here to North Africa and then adjusting up, which we're going to talk more about today. The invasion of Italy. What do you call this? Jenna?
The soft underbelly?
Yes, good job. Soft underbelly. Yeah, I know that sounds strange, but when you're looking at Europe, right? Obviously, when you're looking at it, you can see that Italy's on the very bottom. And when they're invading in here, this is the weakest link, the soft, they call it the soft underbelly of Europe. And this is a way for the Allied powers to start a what front war for Germany? Blake? Two front war. Yes, good job. Good, good, good. Okay, so we finished up talking about Stalingrad. Now the Soviets are pushing the Germans back on the Eastern Front. Now the United States and Great Britain are entering here, the soft underbelly. Right now you got two fronts. Just kind of a matter of time. Right? Oh, I also did mention about which we're going to talk more about today, is that as we're establishing a footing in North Africa, and as we're getting here into Europe, in the parts of Italy, what are we establishing there to try to keep the pressure on Germany? Said it as soon as like the bells. So, Elena. Yeah, like air bases, right? So the whole idea here is if you can control the skies, well, you're gonna win this war. If you can bombard your enemy from distance, right? If you can take out their manufacturing and their industries, right? It's just a matter of time until they're gonna have to give up, until they're gonna have to surrender. They're not gonna have the resources, again, no oil, done, right? They're not gonna have the production, right? They don't have the tanks and airplanes. How are you gonna fight? So that's something crucial I want you guys to remember. By 1942, towards the end, by 1943, right, we control the skies. You can control the skies, you're gonna win the war. You can bomb your enemy into submission. You can take out their production, take out their resources. You guys got that? Olivia, you got that?
Yeah.
See? See. Okay. Here are terms for today.
All right, you got Tuskegee Airmen. Saturation bombing and strategic bombing. So there's another good movie out. Oh, there's a ton of movies on World War II. Anyway, there's a movie called The Red Tails. Pretty good about the Tuskegee Airmen, who we're going to talk about today. I do have an assignment for you today, so don't let me forget. Hey, I've been nice here so far. Now. We can't say I won't. Right? Right, Errol?
They're like 20 minutes into it. Well, you don't have.
Wow, do you hear this? Ungrateful.
She sounds like she's not.
I think it means maybe a low. Because you're going down there. Well, are you serious? Wow. Talk about trying to get a hug and you can't deny it, huh? All right, here we go, here we go. Get working on the terms. Okay, citations, MOA, okay, Oakley, Ben, Eli. You got a whole week. So sick and tired. Sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah. You're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, here you go. Tuskegee Airmen, what do we have? The Red Tails. What did we find here? All right, Jason, go ahead. Hear from you. Yes, good job. Good, good. So, in the United States, still up to this point, when you think about the 1940s, while the Jim Crow laws were still in effect in a lot of the southern states in the United States. Right? Many Southern Democrats wanted to try to hold on of this idea of separate but equal. And segregation and a lot of the opportunities for African Americans, again, just weren't there. Right? So when you think about the United States, well, many African Americans didn't feel at home. But as the war breaks out, well, we do unite, we do come together. Right? Like I mentioned at the start of this topic here, right? Our greatest asset is our diversity. And it's one of those things where it's unfortunate to say, but it takes an event like World War II. And I know I talked about 9/11, but it takes events like this for us all to come together. I wish it would happen all the time. Anyway, though, with the Tuskegee Airmen, all right, this was actually called the Tuskegee Experiment. I know that sounds really bad and terrible, but FDR, the President of the United States, he didn't really think that this was going to work out. At the time, okay, many African Americans were viewed as, well, lesser, not intelligent enough to operate these new mechanisms on the battlefield. Like planes, yeah. So it's obviously sad to say. And FDR, he didn't think this was going to work out. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, she pushed him to spend the money and funding to create an institution to help African Americans learn and understand aviation. Okay. So again, when you think about it, it's 1940s, obviously late 1930s, right? They obviously did some horrible things to imagine, but at the time, that's how it was. Anyway, with the Tuskegee Airmen, though, one thing here to note that this is an African American fighter group, right? They escorted bombers, right? So when they're targeting many of these German cities and manufacturing areas, and industries, right, the production, right? There are a lot of them escorted by the Tuskegee Airmen. They flew over 1,500 missions successfully. And with that, they mean a lot of recognition and a lot of respect during the war. And here's the thing, after the war, well, they're still returning home to a segregated United States. So in many ways, this is a slap in the face to a lot of these men that served in the military, right? Obviously here with the Tuskegee Airmen, African Americans. So in other words, they were very successful. They had a lot of recognition and a lot of respect. Okay, their, again, main objectives was escorting these bombers, these bomber planes, to strategically target German manufacturing. Okay? Can you imagine that for Hitler? Remember his Aryan race ideology, right? Where he had blonde hair, blue eyes, white skin, and the thing, many of these African Americans in the United States here, the Tuskegee Airmen, are taking out their best pilots. And they put the red tail on Jason because this is the way to try to show to these Nazis of the Luftwaffe who's taking them out. So it was kind of like smeared it in their face with it, which again is a really cool story. Right, I attached to the assignment, don't let me forget, I attached to the assignment a video. It was in 2020, President Trump during his State of the Union address. He actually had one of the Tuskegee Airmen recognized in the speech, which is really cool. He passed away since then, right? Actually, a few years ago. But he was the captain of the Tuskegee Airmen, and it was pretty amazing to see him at the speech, at the and getting recognition. So, guys, when you open up the assignment, you'll see the video embedded there. Check it out. Check it out. It's really cool to see. All right, saturation bombing. It says it in the name, right? As the Allied powers are taking over parts of southern Italy, which we'll talk more about here today, right? The whole idea here is just to level out as much as possible. Carpet bombing, you guys ever heard of carpet bombing before? That's pretty much what it is. You're trying to take out as much area, you know, as much industries, factories, buildings as possible. To say that we were the greatest when it came to strategic bombing, we weren't. You gotta imagine, 1940s, it's not like they had missiles and rockets. They're starting to get developed, but they weren't precise enough. And as we're getting to these larger industrial areas in Germany, unfortunately, yeah, a lot of civilians died. Many civilians died. So saturation bombing, you're trying to take out large groupings, right? You're trying to take out large areas that are focused mostly with military production. Yeah, you're gonna get some civilians caught in the crossfire. All right, strategic bombing, that's the opposite. That is more focused on, let's say, the factories, the industries in Germany. Okay, you're trying to eliminate as much as possible the death of civilians. Okay, you don't want to kill civilians in warfare. It's very difficult. When you get to urban warfare, it's almost impossible, right? You think about the hardships of trying to just focus on your enemy, especially when you have many, many people crowding certain areas and certain buildings. Let's say you don't know who the enemy is. You don't know who, let's say, is civilians. And in many cases, they utilize civilians as cover, right? And as a way to disguise themselves amongst the population. So with strategic bombing, this is more focused and trying to make sure that you don't have civilian deaths. Again, difficult to do. All right, here we go. So yesterday we kind of finished up talking about the Battle of the Atlantic. We mentioned about the convoy system, sonar, depth charges. These are depth charges. They're pretty neat looking. They launch off the decks and again, sink down on a surface. As they get close to it, U-boat, submarine, explode. And obviously very successful in the open waters. And again, that's the longest battle of the war, World War I and World War II. Again, you really know where you can run and hide. And when you're out in the middle of the ocean, you've got to hope and pray that this convoy system here is enough to protect you. And the innovations like sonar, depth charges help you out. All right, Operation Torch. Remember this, right? The invasion of North Africa. Again, the United States, we wanted to get our feet wet, right? Yeah, we want to take baby steps as we're getting involved in the war. World War I, were we ready? No. World War II, were we ready? No. Now there's blitzkrieg attacks. Now the innovations on the battlefield are way, way more superior than what we saw in World War I. So for us, we got to take our time. Real quick, we talked about some generals yesterday. What was the guy's nickname? He was a German general. Desert Fox. What was his name? You're looking at your terms here. What? Erwin Rommel. Yes, good job. Good. So Erwin Rommel, he was known as Desert Fox. He was here in charge of protecting North Africa. Later you'll see him. He'll set up the defenses for the Germans, for the D-Day invasion. All right, what about the Allied powers here? Who's pushing Desert Fox out of North Africa? So let's start off with the British general, Jason.
Bernard Montgomery.
Yes, good job, Bernard Montgomery. And this is a lot of tank fighting here, guys. So when you think about North Africa and a lot of the desert environment climate here. Right, this is a lot of tank movements. Right, what about old blood and guts? What was this guy's name? Ben?
George Patton.
George Patton, yes, good job. So we'll talk more about him later in the war. Last thing here, as we take North Africa, yes, we're getting into Italy, right? As we get into Italy here, this is known as Operation Husky, taking Sicily and moving up into here into parts of southern Italy. Real quick, guys, as we're getting into Italy, Italy will break in half. Right, half of it will be liberated by the Allies in 1943. So in other words, Italy surrenders in 1943, and they'll actually join our side. Do they flip flop again? Well, kinda, after we defeated them, right? Real quick, Mussolini will kind of run his operations still here in northern Italy, but as we get to 1945, well, we'll get there, and as Mussolini is defeated, his own people string him behind a car and drag him across the streets of Milan and string him up like a cow ready to get slaughtered. It's brutal, terrifying, and don't look up the pictures, there's a bunch, but don't look them up, okay? I mean, it's one of those things, it's really, really hard to see, but it just goes to show, the Italians are over this fascist regime, over this war. All right, anyway, real quick, guys, we are very successful at solidifying a second front here. Last thing is the Tuskegee Airmen. I just talked about them. We'll focus more on, well, you guys have the assignment, I'm gonna post that now. Right, we'll focus more on this. I'm looking at you reviewing Tuskegee Airmen success, right? Now they flew over 1,500 missions and they're taking out the Luftwaffe left and right and continuing these bombing runs over there. Oh, see you guys later. Thank you. Hey, Simon, don't forget. See yous.
Good day.
See you, Audrina, you too. I got you already.